Okay, welcome back guys, and in the previous lesson we managed to fix our layout issues so that our product list page and our product details page all appear within this white area here. What I want to do in this lesson is implement our add to basket button. At the moment the button doesn't actually do anything at all, so it's pretty useless in terms of an e-commerce solution. So let's now actually implement this button. Now this gives us a very interesting little issue. Our issue is, let's say for example we are on the product details screen here. We've got an add to basket button. So let's say for example we've got a state for our actual cart items, but where are we actually going to store the state? Are we going to store it on the product details screen like this? Or are we going to store it on this screen here? And then maybe have it so an event that gets bubbled up from our product details screen up to this screen, because we've also got an add to basket button here. Or should we actually have the cart items stored on the state on the main screen like an app? Now we could do that, but it starts to get a little bit messy because we have to effectively bubble up events from our components here. If we press the add to basket button, we have to raise an event on the screen here, and then we have to then correspondingly raise it all the way up our component tree up to our app. And it's going to get a little bit messy. So what we really want to do is have some mechanism that allows us to have this state in just one place. Like a form of global state is what I'm kind of getting at. So how can we do this in React? Well, the React state that we've already learnt about on the course so far only allows us to have state within a single component, but not shared among all other components in the tree. However, it does have the concept of a React context. So the context is a special mechanism in React that allows us to share state among multiple components all in one single place. Okay, so let's have a go at using this little context. Okay, so we're back in our code. What we're going to do is we're going to create ourselves a folder called contexts. Now we're going to create a new file, and we're going to call it cartcontext.js. And now we're going to do the usual import React thing in here. Very good. And now what we're going to do is we're going to import from React a thing called create context. Okay, this is a very special function, as the name suggests, which will create ourselves a global context to store some state. So what we can do now is create ourselves a context. So let's call it cart context. And we're now just going to call this create context function. So create context like that. We're now going to export the context so that we can use it throughout our application. So let's put export const cart context. Now we've got a context. This will actually give us two things. It will give us a consumer and a provider. What we want to do in this particular example is we want to tap into the provider function because we are providing context for our components. Okay, so let's create ourselves a provider. We're going to call it cart context provider. And that's just simply a function. And what we're going to do is simply return some JSX, which is the cart context provider. So cart context dot provider, like this. As you can see, we've got a provider and a consumer, so we're going to use provider, and then we need to provide it with an initial value, and the initial value is the initial state for our application. We don't actually have one at the moment, so let's just give it a blank object and just finish off this provider like this. And now we need to actually create ourselves some initial state. What are we going to do? Well, we want to store some cart items. And the cart items for the moment can just be a simple array. So let's say const initial state An initial state is going to be an object, and the object is an array called cart items, and we're going to default it to an empty array like that. And now in the value, we can simply pass in our initial state. So let's do initial state. Okay, so that keeps that happy. And now we need to export our provider so that we can use it in other parts of our application. So export default cart context provider. Okay, very good. Let's give that a save. And let's go to our application. And everything seems to be working just fine. Now, the reason why it's working fine is we're not actually doing anything with our context provider. We've just literally created a file, but we're not actually using it in any way at all. Now, in order to use our provider, we need to basically wrap our entire application in this provider here. Okay, so where we've got our entire application, if we go to index.js, we've got this app components here. If you remember in the previous lesson, we took out all our routing and we managed to move it into our app.js down here. And the reason for that is because I knew we were going to put some context in, and this is a perfect place to be able to separate our app and then things like context around it. Right. We now need to import our cart context provider into our index.js. Okay, so import cart context provider from contexts cart context. That should be context, that's why it's not finding IntelliSense. Let's do that again. So it's contexts and then cart there we go. And now we can simply wrap our app with this cart context provider. And don't forget, the cart context provider already gives us some actual little JSX markup here. Right, so let's do cart context provider, wrap our app in it, tidy up, and just before we run this, we need to actually make sure we import it correctly. We've actually got a default context here. So let's get rid of the brackets here, like so. If we give that a save and go to our web page, we can see we get a completely blank page. Well, that's not very good, is it? So let's find out what's going on. Let's open up our DevTools. If we now go to our Redux components, we can see we get the actual provider and the context provider, but nothing actually inside it. There's no app. So this is where we need to use the React child feature that we've seen before in the course. So let's go to the cart context, and this gets provided with our children. So let's put children, and then we can simply render the children inside our provider. So children, like this. If we go back to our application, we can see that we get our application rendered absolutely fine. If we open up our DevTools and inspect the components, we now get everything we're expecting. We've got our cart context provider right at the very top of the tree, then our context provider, and then our app underneath. Okay, let's leave it there, and in the next lesson we're going to figure out a way of being able to use this context to be able to add and remove our items from the cart. I shall see you there.